Feeding our babies is supposed to come naturally. We see images of cooing babies and smiling moms and doting grandmas and expect that to be us. We don't see all the struggle that goes into every decision that seems so high stakes at the time. We don't expect all the leaking, the engorgement, the deciding to take a break. We don't expect all the judgment, whether we breastfeed or bottle feed or pump or don't. Or maybe we do expect all those things and it comes smooth sailing. But what I have encountered as a doula, a childbirth educator, and a lactation professional is that when I tell people what I do, the stories flow out naturally. And I love hearing them. I hope you do too. I'm your host, Lo. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I started the Milk Making Minutes because I'm passionate about supporting breastfeeding people. But more importantly, I knew that hearing real people tell real stories would benefit both the storytellers and the listeners. I had this idea for 3 years before I launched. I asked so many people how I should begin, and Anchor came up repeatedly as the easiest way to launch a podcast. And I have not been disappointed. If you are passionate about a topic and have wanted to start a podcast, you can use Anchor to record and distribute your podcast. It's easy to use. You can use the editing tools right from the platform. You can distribute your podcast episodes seamlessly to listening platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts right from Anchor. And the best part is, it's free. And the tech support has been great too. Go to anchor.fm or download the app right to your phone to get started on your great podcast idea. Hi, welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. Welcome, Elle. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, it's good to be here.
I'd love for you to start out just by introducing yourself and your family, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Okay. Well, I'm a mom that currently resides in Massachusetts. I have 2 children. One's going to be turning 9 soon. The other one just turned 4. I'm married. That's about it about my family.
Awesome. And so you have 2 kiddos. It's been a while since you breastfed the oldest one. Do you use the terms breastfeeding?
Let's see. I think I usually use breastfeeding. I occasionally nursing.
Breastfeeding and nursing. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so I can't wait to hear all about what that has been like. But before we do, I want to think about, so let's think about like before, way back when, before you even had children, what was your exposure to body feeding, breastfeeding, nursing? What had you been exposed to?
Okay, well, as far as exposure goes, when I think about it, I wasn't really exposed to directly in my life seeing anyone breastfeeding because I was the youngest child in my family, and I was about 6 years apart from the next from my next sibling. So the closest in age would have been 6, and then going all the way up to 12 years apart. So why they would have seen our mother doing that, I didn't actually see it directly, but I did see we did have photo albums that did show my mother actually giving birth at home with a midwife, and also breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So my parents were kind of hippies, so they were fairly like body comfortable just in general. Like I don't think like shirtlessness wouldn't have even been a big deal amongst different genders, and kind of that kind of natural, just a average amount of natural, no shame with bodies, and very open proponents of breastfeeding if people wanted to. Then they weren't shy on that.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Do you still have those albums? Or those
I
albums with photos?
It is possible that one of my older that my middle sister might have the albums. I actually haven't
Mm-hmm.
thought about them for a while, and it's actually possible my dad might have. It was a small series I remember of. They were like small photos, like almost like negatives or proofs. But I remember in one of them it was a home birth. There were some of those, so it's one of my other family members might have them, but I don't have them myself. No.
Wow. Were you born at home?
I was, yeah. Everyone, I think everyone in my family except for my oldest sister might not have been, but the rest of us, three of us were, yeah,
Okay.
born right at home.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So you were the youngest, so you didn't really see your mom feeding babies, but it was something that happened in your family. Did she talk to you about what that was like, or not? Not really.
I think for like her and a lot of people that she would have been around, like other mothers who breastfed, it was kind of like second nature for them. So she didn't really talk about like she was a huge like proponent of it, and she talked about like the fondness of it, and just liking it, and just being a big proponent of it, but she didn't talk about like how it was done. It seemed like it was very second nature, so that it wouldn't have even been a question. Like I don't remember there ever being anything about it being problematic or difficult. It just seemed more second nature. So I'm wondering if it wasn't, something already passed down with her. And I can say actually I did get to my sister actually did breastfeed around me, which was kind of neat before I
Oh,
had children.
right.
So again, in my family that was
Yes.
pretty like, but that would have been when I was late teens, early 20s probably for that. Um but yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't remember my
Yeah.
mother talking about the actual like the process. It seems very like intuitive, I guess, for her. But just she is
Mm-hmm.
very like I said, very body positive, very very casual, very just easygoing. Yeah, yeah, not even really opinionated, but just it was a fondness for her, and nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you and I know each other in real life, so I kind of had known some of that. But do you think just that attitude about feeding babies in general and seeing your sister breastfeed as a teen, do you think that how do you think that that impacted you when it became your turn, when you decided to, when you were pregnant and thinking about making these decisions for your family?
I think that it just well, I guess I thought that, again, it would be intuitive and easy for me. Like I didn't think that there would be anything really to think about, that it would just because it had already when I had seen it or had my relatives talk about it, it just didn't seem like there was anything to it. It just seemed like they easily just, like my sister just easily went into it, and it was just like second nature.
Mhm.
And when my mother talked
Mm,
about it, the same kind of thing. I don't think for her it was something that that was that had any catches, or but I mean I think maybe her births were
mm.
not straightforward, but like fairly average, and I'd say other than that, I mean I think they set me up to feel very comfortable. I it I never really felt like, embarrassed or uncertain about it. It was like an unquestionable thing for me. So I guess growing up with it, it just seemed like the easiest thing, where I was like, wow, it'll be less work because I won't have any, I won't have to clean anything or go buy anything. I'll just already have it packed and ready to go with me wherever I go. And
Yeah, right. Yeah,
yeah, like that kind of thing, and then just feeling that it was so normal that I didn't really feel any hangups about it. So that was nice, because I didn't know if under other situations where there's switch ups between generations, if it's ever difficult to, you know, to start in on something that you're hearing about, but that you weren't exposed to before, that wasn't talked about, especially when some of the
yeah,
culture
exactly.
and the way people behave isn't really set up to make space for it sometimes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so then if you can think back to near, I guess 9 years ago now, because you were pregnant 9 years ago this time,
Yeah.
which is crazy. I didn't know you
Yeah,
then,
very
but
crazy.
so you're pregnant. you were pregnant with your first. What did you have goals in mind for how long you wanted to breastfeed, or anything like that, or were you just going to play it by ear?
You know, when I think back on it, I didn't have any goals. I didn't really think about it. Again, I think I just in my mind kind of assumed that it was something that would just naturally unfold, and then you would do it, and then I guess I kind of thought that the baby would decide when they didn't want to nurse anymore, and that it just was a like something that naturally started and naturally ended, and I didn't really put any more thought into it than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great. And do you remember any of your care providers talking to you about it before, during prenatally?
You know, it's funny prenatally. No, I don't believe I ever remember it being touched on. I think maybe just as simple as saying, "Do you intend to breastfeed?" I think that might have been the extent of the
Hmm.
discussion. I don't remember anything besides that.
Hmm. Okay. So no offers of, no offers for education or anything uh, prenatally
Um, You
from
know,
your
that
providers.
thinking about it, no, I don't remember. With my first child, I was seeing a midwife where I would travel and go to a birth center for the appointments. And then for my second child, I started out in a hospital setting, but switched pretty quickly back to the same birthing center. And I think on the
Hmm.
second one too, I mean, they just don't ask as much because they can already tell that you're more comfortable or you're going to bring up things that you want to know about. But the first time around,
Hmm.
I mean, it is 9 years ago, so I could be mistaken, but I don't really recall. We probably talked about it a little bit. They
Hmm.
probably asked me just my ideas about it or how familiar I was with it. But beyond that, I don't really remember. I don't really remember it being
Yeah.
any kind of education. I think they maybe had some cards for you know, um different types of support for it if it was needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So then, this is mostly a baby feeding centric podcast, but we all know that the birth experience can impact feeding outcomes. And so, do you mind giving us a quick synopsis of your birth experience and what impact you think it might have had on your breastfeeding journey?
Oh, of course. Let's see. Now, is this for both children?
Let's let's start with the first, and then we'll go back.
Okay. So just like the birthing experience for my first child, my first child ended up coming early, and I hadn't expected that. There
Mm,
was nothing that was showing that they would have been early, and nothing that existed in family history for early birth. So that they ended up arriving about 6.5 weeks early. And it was just I had been at
mm,
home,
mhm,
and my water broke, and I called up my
mm,
midwife, and she told me to just sleep on it, to just sleep to the morning, because she said, "You might as well get your sleep. Probably nothing immense is going to happen in this time period." And then when I woke up in the morning, I had to go. I went to with her to the hospital, and they tested to make sure it was amniotic fluid, and it was. And then I had to go to a more
mm.
main hospital because of how early the baby was. Is only certain hospitals will do, certain times. So I had to travel a little bit farther to
Right.
go there. And it did end up proceeding as a natural birth. I didn't end up needing a C-section. They thought maybe it would be a possibility. Um, and I think they did try to induce me somewhat, even though I was having contractions, just to speed it up, because I think they're a bit concerned with um, the fluid getting lower, and then
Mm,
the birthing experience was fairly pleasant, which was interesting for a first birth. It was fairly like euphoric. I did end up needing stitches at the end, which I
mm,
was surprised about because I didn't feel anything didn't really feel any I- pain really or anything like that. So I was a little surprised. I thought I had
And you were
had wasn't
unmedicated?
going to need stitches, and it was a fairly small baby, about 5 pounds 1 ounces, but looked very tiny too. Um, when they're early like
Uh-huh.
that too, the skull's somewhat smaller, the head's somewhat smaller too, besides just being the baby still looks kind of rotund, but they're just kind of tiny overall. So that was about it for the birthing
Mhm.
experience. It was a nice birthing experience, but just the complication of having so many people in a room, and they're very concerned when the baby's born, so they want to take them right away to test them. You do get to hold them first. I got to hold the baby first, but then after that, they're very concerned with making sure,
Okay.
like, oxygen levels and stuff. So that's a little fussy, but that was about it for the parts
Yeah.
that I wasn't crazy about.
Yeah. Okay. So the birth was unmedicated, right?
Yeah,
you were not on pain relief, or you?
I
Okay.
had
So
no
an
pain relief.
unmedicated birth. Okay. And you said you held him for how long did you get to hold
Oh
your
goodness.
first?
It's funny that I got to hold him, like, immediately. So, before the cord was cut, and I wanted delayed cord cutting if possible as well. And I,
Mhm.
they delayed it, but not like for a super long time. I found, and
Mhm.
they had some kind of arbitrary reason for cutting it, and because I wanted to wait till it stopped pulsing. But they just waited a little bit. I think it's maybe even just for the movement of the baby to run tests. So I would say, I didn't get to hold for that long. I'm really not too sure. I mean, not
Mhm.
longer than 10 or 15 minutes, I don't imagine. I got to put them on skin to skin, but
Okay.
because they want you to connect with them. But then, like I said, at that, they're not really sure which things have matured. And so, besides things like other tests later on, I think that they make sure that the breathing is proper, and other vitals are
Mhm.
proper, so that they don't have to, if they need some kind of assistance, they want to get them. They have like a special team waiting to the side with a little one of those, like, little incubators, and all the little necessary
Mhm.
devices. It did turn out that there was no need for oxygen or really much of anything, other than, I believe, it was just an IV, and IV for fluids, and IV for antibiotics, because with an early birth too, at a certain point, they can't test for I can't the bacteria there. I'm trying to remember the I can't remember what it is. There's that bacteria, the something positive, that they have to test, but they only test at a certain
Oh,
point. And so, since they
Strep B positive?
yes. Yeah, and since they can't test for they hadn't
Okay.
tested for it at that point, and it takes so long for the test to come back, they just naturally do antibiotics just in
Mhm.
case there's an infection that happened, and they didn't, that came
Okay.
back negative, but they do it just in case, because with early onset labor, they sometimes think that an infection could be, what caused it. In this instance, it wasn't, but
Okay.
just to be careful, they
Okay.
you could probably refuse them, but I didn't. I didn't, because I didn't know the answers on those either.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So then how long was it before you were able to try to feed your first?
Oh, that
Do you remember?
that's where, yeah, that one was a little more complex, because so after that, my husband ended up staying with the baby for the testing. I needed to get the stitches, and that kind of thing. So while I was having
Mhm.
that done, they took the baby to do the testing, where they want to see, like, what how the liver is working, what's the bilirubin levels, how's the oxygen,
Mhm.
other vitals. They do all those, and like I said, they do some blood tests. They have to take blood to see if there's any kind of bacteria going on, and so they run all those. And I mean, it could have been it could have been an hour, maybe, before, could have been 30 minutes, could have been an hour. It's funny, is there's kind of like like a weird kind of almost tired, sleepy euphoria after. So I don't really remember feeling like a huge amount of concern and or having like a really accurate idea of time. And yeah, and then I remember getting wheeled to the area where they're in like a little incubator because they get light treatment for the high bilirubin levels. And and I remember picking up and trying to like nurse immediately at that point. So it could have been around 30 minutes to an hour. And then I tried nursing at that point.
Okay. Okay. So after about 30 minutes to an hour, you were able to try. And how did that go? How was that first attempt at nursing? What was that
So,
like?
so it doesn't I don't know if it's ever different in other circumstances, but because of that early type of labor, your body isn't quite ready to nurse like it would be if you went the full length. So there's no milk ready. I didn't there might I mean, they say that there is, some tiny amounts of, like, colostrum available for the baby, but it kind of felt like there was absolutely nothing there, like, it just wasn't ready, like, because of that. So,
Mhm.
obviously we did it anyways to work on that letdown occurring for it to come in, but, the lactation consultant there told me that it could take 2 days, and that, we could try to
Mhm.
establish the nursing before then, but they were kind of very heavy on using, a machine instead to use a pump to try to get to stimulate the breast and to try to get that milk to come in as quickly as possible because the machine the baby's reflexes for the breathe, suck, swallow, it's is not quite as developed
Mhm.
in the early stages, and it's a lot of work for the baby.
Mhm.
And they'll almost when they do get to nursing, they'll nurse, and then you can hear them. You can hear them nurse and then kind of take a break like they're trying to catch their breath and work on it again. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there was a big focus on the machine, which instead they had kind of set you up with a machine and say and have you focus on it. It's definitely a tough thing, and I think it's tough, particularly the first time around because you've got really no experience to go on. So it's a little harder to even advocate for what you think might work or even knowing yourself because it's the first experience.
Yeah. So how did that feel? Did you feel like what they were asking you to do was different than you wanted to do? Or did you feel like, yeah, tell me more about that because I can't tell from what you're saying whether you feel like, yeah, this was right because baby, was struggling to suck and swallow and breathe and get organized, or if you really felt like I would have rather that you would have rather focused on um, just the baby instead of having to bring a pump in. What were you feeling at that time?
I think I mean because because the lactation consultant and nurse I was working with specifically worked in the NICU, I deferred to her because of her experience and
Hmm.
kind of just figured that
Hmm.
she had the information to know what she was doing. She was a really good proponent, and she had actually worked on getting the hospital recognized as a baby friendly hospital. So I really did defer to her opinion on that type of thing.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I would say because the baby's is particularly sleepy, so it is. There's definitely having later on
Mm-hmm.
had a second baby that wasn't early. I would say there is a big difference in that an early baby is
Yeah.
very sleepy and they do like to nurse, but it isn't as strong. It's not quite as strong. They do fall asleep more frequently, and I think their whole thing was just
Hmm.
their concern was establishing the milk supply. And it's kind of funny because if you using the machine, it ended up that I ended up with way too large of a milk supply. Like it got it going too heavily
Hmm.
for the baby to, to even deal with. But I think I think that their intentions were good, and I think they kind of work with some of the best science they have, and I can think too that if I hadn't listened to that and just worked with the baby, it might have worked out just fine, but it might have been stressful or more difficult to build up the supply. Maybe it would have been, a lot lighter and not been able to build up as quickly. So I don't really feel quite,
Right.
I can have an emotional opinion on it, but I don't feel like scientifically qualified to pick on it, but I would say it's definitely, it's a stressful thing, it's tiring. It's tiring to use, they want you to use the
Mhm.
pump every 2 hours, and you have to wash it, and so and you wanna be with your baby, you wanna see your baby. So it's definitely, it's
Mhm.
just a taxing event, and I'm sure other moms that go through it, it's a similar experience, and you just try to make the best decision, and, there's kinda no probably perfect in that scenario. Eh.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so, you mentioned this one, nurse at the in the NICU, what was that nurse an IBCLC, do you know? Or
Um, that I believe so. I think she had, like, I mean, she was the head of that, so I can't say it was a bigger hospital, like a very big hospital and, like, a teaching hospital
Mhm,
because, again, it has an actual large NICU department even for, like, micro
like
preemies,
a large
well,
NICU.
which I didn't have a micro preemie,
Uh-huh,
um, and she was, like,
yeah.
the head of that whole type of,
Okay.
nursing, and so I'm going to think she did, and I could probably even look it up because we stayed in touch,
Oh,
but
oh,
I
that's
don't
great. Yeah, I'm
recall.
just curious, because yeah. I always like to ask what type of supports a person received postpartum while in the hospital, and I assume that you were in the hospital for longer than a person typically is. At least your baby was. How long were you guys in the NICU?
Oh boy, this is one of those ones I'd ask my husband because he's really good with time typically, where he remembers those exactly. And I want to say, I think it was at
Right.
least 4 weeks.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I think it was
Yeah,
4 weeks, and I
that's a
think it
while.
was, yeah, maybe 2 weeks at the large hospital, and then I was able to transfer back to my hometown, to their hospital.
Hmm. Okay. Wow, that's a long stay. So did you feel like you were getting, good support, breastfeeding support specifically throughout that duration?
Um, I would say, no. I don't think so. I think, uh, there's you don't really see the same individual. It switches a lot where, you constantly are seeing different people, and a lot of people, even though they're professionals. Now, I would say the lactation, coordinator, who I just looked up, is at IBCLC. I just looked up,
Okay.
was excellent, but she
Okay,
she, rotated around. But some of the nurses kind of had, like,
of course.
came in with their own opinions, so even though, like, I didn't want pacifiers used, ones that thought that liked them themselves, even though they knew it would like try to like sneak one in, which is, it's just kind of, weird and unprofessional. And then sometimes some would be really
Yeah.
sensitive about me removing the baby from, the light treatment because I wanted to do skin to skin and hold the baby, but
Mhm.
they were like, some of them were particularly really like, you've gotta keep the baby under the light because the bilirubin levels have to come down really quickly, and so a lot of people, I think, still embodied, like, their own personal opinions, on and some people were more supportive of, like, yes, skin to skin, yes, spend time breastfeeding, that's gonna make the baby healthier, and other ones who are just like, "Leave them in the
Mhm.
incubators, stop taking them." And so
Mhm.
I'd say yeah, I the bigger hospital I liked less than the smaller hospital. The smaller hospital was actually better. They mostly just let me do anything. listened really well, and they even,
Mhm.
said, like, "We're not that fami" when I transferred, "We're not that familiar with young babies. What have you been doing and what's working?" And, okay, like, they told us we have to measure the bursts, for when the baby nurses, and we've never done that before, like, "Is this what it looks like? Is that what you've been" so they were more, like,
Oh,
warm about working, and just kinda letting me be other than that. But the other one was way more invasive, and, NICUs don't, have a space for you to stay with your baby either, which is, like and it doesn't make a lot of sense because they're
right,
proponents of skin to skin and breastfeeding, and yet you can't room with your baby, so you end up having to just sleep
right,
someplace in the hospital. Why when you go to back to a smaller,
right.
hospital, they'll let you room with the baby once they're not, once they don't have to be on certain types of, machines, which again, I think it was really just the, IV, and then that wasn't even the whole time, and then the light for the bilirubin were the only interventions, and, then,
Yeah,
the an NG tube for a little bit, it's a little tube that goes through the
okay.
nostril, to and that
Mhm.
was kinda interesting too, because the baby's early, their stomachs are very small, so they like to try to eat when the baby
Right.
won't take a lot of milk, they'll put a little milk right through the little tube, and, it'll kind of, help the baby develop a little bit, and they kinda described it as, like, stretching their stomach, putting a little bit making sure they're getting enough food, not just sleeping, and, getting them a little bit
Mhm.
more, nutrition, but yeah, that was about it.
And were they providing, your milk, human milk through the NG tube, or were they providing formula?
Yep, through the NG tube was the milk I was pumping.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, so how long, was it before you got to go home? You said 4 weeks, right?
Well, I think it was, for, like, my to return to my house with the actual baby, that was, I believe 4 weeks, if I'm
Yeah.
remembering correctly. Yeah, it's not like it was fresh
Okay, and
in
so
my mind
how
just
w
not that long ago, but
I mean, 9 years of parenting, it can seem like an eternity when you're trying to remember,
it
uh,
does,
uh,
yeah.
facts. Yeah. So, how was nursing going by the time you, were going home with baby?
It's funny, I think, I think with the first one and everything not going smoothly in the beginning, I ended up overthinking. Like, I ended up getting kind of stuck in a
Mhm.
rut of overthinking because everything was so measured. They would want me to, like, write down when they were eating and how many bursts, and, how are the breathe, suck swallows, and there was a lot of, like, record keeping
Mm.
and weighing diapers and counting them. So it's not like a good thing, like when your hormones are kind of trying to change, and you should be resting and just holding your baby, to, like, be so measured about everything. So I think it kind of got me into a little thing of, like, kind of overthinking. So after with nursing, I always was, like, felt a little suspect that I wasn't doing it proper, that something wasn't quite right. And it is, maybe not
Mm.
always, but for me, it was a little bit harder to feel if it was right, because the baby is smaller, their mouth is smaller, and, they're a little bit early on learning something like eating. And so I felt like, to some degree, like, maybe a little bit of discomfort was normal, but then I always heard that there shouldn't be any discomfort. And so I went through some phases of thinking sometimes that the latch wasn't correct, and other times it just seeming like it was perfect. And I remember feeling a little stressed occasionally about that. And I think some of it was probably overthinking. And I think some of it was just biology. Like, I had a heavier letdown, like a very active letdown. And I think that would sometimes cause the baby to
Mhm.
compress slightly with its tongue in an attempt to slow the
Mhm.
letdown. So I think some things like that, and not knowing that could be a possibility, would make me think something like the latch was off. And so I found that to be a little bit more
Right.
like not as easy as I had planned or suspected it would be.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, your experience before being pregnant was being surrounded by people who had home births and had fed their baby so easily, and you just assumed that it would come so intuitively. And then you had a baby that was born so early and then spent 4 weeks in the NICU.
Oh,
So
yes.
then it kind of took the intuition out of it, right? You wanted to be intuitive, but then you were being asked to do all these things that meant that you weren't just focusing on intuition, but were actually kind of monitoring feeding in a way that wasn't exactly intuitive.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
That's
It's
really fascinating.
yeah, it's hard to kind of just enjoy the moment, but also then be like, okay, I've gotta write down this, I've got to inform that. And then you have a lot of interruptions because
Mhm.
they kind of I think they take blood at least every single day. It might have been more than that to check certain levels.
Mm,
They're very baby oriented and like very I guess concerned about, about everything
mhm,
going on with an early baby. It's probably stuff that's already been
mhm.
written and said that it has to be done, that they're just systems that they stick to. But it's interruptive
Yeah,
and a lot of, again, a lot of work, and you're already super tired and you're already not sleeping, and then combine that with the fact that they don't provide a bed for mothers who have early babies, and facilities and so
right,
on. You end up with a lot of things that you're
right.
trying to deal with and work out, so a lot of stuff to kind of juggle.
Yeah, but by the time you were home, you mentioned that your husband, oh, he would know exactly how long we were there. So was he better at helping you track some of these things you were being asked to track? Was he, um, because you're doing all this work with breastfeeding, was that one of the ways that he was able to be supportive? Was kind
Oh,
of helping you monitor some of these things you were being asked to monitor?
for sure, he was really hands on, so he liked to do a lot of that. He liked to help keep track and write things down. A lot of the diaper changes. I think it was very stressful to him, and he felt really sensitive about the baby and them being small, and he was very like concerned with getting home. He really didn't want to be there at all, and so that was a big thing where he would ask
Mhm,
frequently, what would it take to leave? What would it take to go home? Because he didn't think it was a very
mhm,
like healthy environment, and that like they're again focused on the baby and doing good things for them. Not so much that, but um that once they seem kind of healthy, it's like, well, can we go yet? Is this okay? They also do things like they have to do a certain test with a car seat. I think they do it at regular, with regular weighted babies too, and they have to
yeah,
be in a car seat for a whole but it doesn't work out as well with an early baby. They fail the test a lot. So
mhm,
I think, they had done a
mm.
few of those and they failed, and so they won't let you leave even if other things are going well. And again, it's a precaution because they don't want, I
Oh
think, a
my
type of apnea and breathing to occur. But I remember that he is super helpful, but I do remember he was also, it was taking a mental toll on him, and he really wanted to go home, and he really felt sensitive. It's a sensitive environment, not even just for your baby, but
Mhm.
if you hear a call or something go over on the intercom, for intervention for a baby,
Yeah,
it can be a stressful environment. You see other parents and stuff, and that kind of thing. So very, very
yeah,
helpful and very supportive. But I remember how like it was emotionally charged too, and tiring. And he mostly stayed with me too. I stayed at the hospital the whole time, even though there wasn't a place to room, because I wanted to be there, and he stayed at the main hospital with me the whole time. And then when we transferred to the smaller hospital that was near our home, he left, but I was then able to room and stayed. the rest of the duration.
Yeah. Yeah. And how much time were you now, was your plan to go back to work after delivering, or was your plan to stay home with the baby?
I didn't have an exact plan. I was when by the time I I think I was thinking of going back to work. When my water broke early, I just informed work that I thought I was in labor and I thought it was early, and because of that, I didn't know when I would return, and so that I probably just wouldn't return. But I wasn't
Mhm.
working. I wasn't working like full time. I wasn't working a full time job. I was working part time or just certain days, and so it was. I think it was already a little bit in the works that maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't, and it wasn't like a big deal. But with the early occurrence, I was like, because then it becomes different too when you can put an individual, I believe, into daycare, and none of that was into
Mm.
play, in place or anything. And but I'd say my preference looking back would have just been to stay with them and to just return if I wanted to at some point. But I was more
Yeah.
interested if I could, in staying, uh being a stay-at-home mom and doing that instead of returning. So I didn't return to work.
Okay. Okay. And um what about your husband? Did he get any paid time off um
I believe if I remember
to
correctly,
be home
he
with?
used. Oh, to like, well, like not paternity leave or anything. That is just vacation time, I believe. It is vacation time, but his work was really
Okay.
good
Okay. Yeah,
about
that's
he
what I'm asking.
he could
Yeah.
stay as long as he like. They weren't even concerned of just like do what you need to do, because he explained the circumstance and said I really don't want to, because I think the hospital was like 3 hours from our house. He said he didn't really want to just leave me there, especially because I just given birth and you don't have like a place to stay, and we weren't going to drive 3 hours home and just leave the baby there, because I wanted to establish breastfeeding. So he had just kind of like told them, and they said, "Don't even worry about it. Stay as long as you need to. We'll make sure everything's taken care of." And I think it ended up being about 2 weeks that he was out, but yeah, there was no like paternity leave or
Okay.
anything like that. But
Okay.
it was a pretty good circumstance overall.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for what we get here in the US, pretty good
Yeah,
circumstance,
the
I
fact that
guess.
I think so, and just that the individuals themselves were very compassionate and just like do whatever you need to do. Just keep us informed, and that was about it. So, and it ended up just being the 2 weeks uh, that he needed to be
Yeah.
out. So, but the way they
Yeah.
the way they handled it was, I think, pretty compassionate and just easygoing on it. There's no stress for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So, how long before nursing, if it ever did, felt normal for you with your first?
So I'd say with my first, it was for a while. It was kind of on and off. Where like sometimes it felt normal, and other times it didn't. Like it was just kind of inconsistent. And then there'd be like long phases where what was seemed perfect, and then sometimes it come back where it seemed a little off again, which was kind of odd.
Mm.
And so I did see some individuals to see if they could spot anything, or give me any advice that might help out. And other than that, I mean, I think it mostly did feel normal, and because I don't quite remember like a start and stop to it. Like I don't remember anything specific that really changed it up. Just that like it was maybe a little more unpredictable in my first, and I think it was just due to some circumstances that would happen here and there, like having a heavier letdown. I think sometimes would cause like more of like a slight clamping, or like a pressing against the palate with the tongue to try to deal with
Mm.
a heavier letdown, where it would come through too
Mhm.
quickly. And that kind of thing of just kind of getting used to that. So if I had to put a time to it, I don't I think it felt, it was probably good after maybe a month or 2, because it was a little harder, um, a little bit more work with them being smaller and needing to kinda catch up on, some of their
Yeah.
some of their natural skills, and then other than that, there would just be, like,
Mhm.
little phases here and there where I'd be like, "Oh, that seems a little bit off," and then it would usually go back to normal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what were nights like?
Oh,
Did
so
you Yeah.
I mean, nursing depending on, it was just kind of all over the place. It could be, I chose to mostly always co-sleep, and sometimes with one of
Mhm.
those little beds that you can kind of put in your own bed. Like those little uh
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
little things you can put
the
them
little
in. But
sidecar. Yeah.
yeah, and so, did that, and I thinking back, I mean, I think it was pretty frequently in the beginning, and I think they told me, like, even if they're sleeping, like, to, like, wake them up or grab them up and nurse them, and I think that was the whole because they're, early, make sure they're getting enough, so just, offer it, in the beginning when they're little, and make sure you don't wanna sleep through the night because you don't wanna end up if the baby is a lighter nurse or because it's tinier, you don't wanna lose, a good established milk supply. So and I think they were still even having
Mm,
me pump if
mhm.
I remember correctly. So, like, I would nurse, and then when I was done nursing, I was supposed to pump too, and I even at night. So that was pretty miserable. I don't think I did that for too long because it didn't seem, it didn't seem like a sustainable a sustainable lifestyle for having, your wits about you. Get just too tired for, I would have probably rather if the supply went down, just find something else, but it didn't. It was well established and it was fine, so I stopped the pumping, maybe after, like, a month, maybe, and just,
Okay.
I would offer still if, my baby didn't wake up, I would pick them up in the early days and, offer so I could make sure
Mhm.
that I didn't go too long, without nursing them because they didn't, eat as heavily as, as some other babies would. Could just be an individual thing.
Right.
Would offer it, and I would say, in the beginning, it was probably, every 2 hours and then kinda, spread out, and the more it went on, the less concerning it was, and if I
Mm,
didn't nurse too because of the large milk supply, that the whole you just get letdowns through the night, so I would have to put like a pad down in the bed to soak everything up. There is just so much that
mm,
even wearing pads wouldn't
yeah,
deal with it. It would just, and that I think was from doing the pump as well. It just kinda
right,
made too much. Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah. Um, I wanna make sure we get in enough time to hear about the second, but I wanna know before we, go back and start all over and hear about how your second experience was, how long did you end up nursing with the first?
So with the first, it was at least 3 years. If
Okay,
I and I think it probably ended between 2 and 3, but, so
okay.
probably right around that age change, I would say, like, if I'm remembering correctly, again, it probably ended, like, at 3. Yeah.
And was it just a gradual weaning?
Yeah, it was gradual, of just, like, less and less, and until it wasn't anymore, um, and
Mhm,
I I guess I wasn't really sure to expect on that because I thought I could just leave it up to, my child to decide when they wanted to stop, and I guess I kinda thought they would stop earlier, that it would just not be of interest and the
mhm,
other things would be, and a few times early on, I think I had thought they would stop all the way, but then they would get sick or they would, get a stomach virus, and they would come back and I would still have a supply, and it seemed to, provide a lot of comfort. Or if they were sick and they weren't really wanting to eat other foods and stuff, it seemed that, nursing was something that was comforting, and it it was particularly worked during those instances when they were ill. And I even remember a few times when they were really sick, when I would talk to the doctor, they would say it was good that I was breastfeeding, because they said otherwise you might have to go and get like an IV if they weren't able to hold down food, but that they
Oh,
weren't
wow.
really concerned because they were still nursing. So that was kind of cool. It kept them
Oh,
hydrated,
great.
and it was well tolerated. They would
Right.
rarely, even if they had a stomach illness, it seemed to get them through quicker, and it seemed that they could tolerate it and it wouldn't make them sick. So it was kind of just seemed like a benefit, and I just went along with it, and I was just never concerned. So I just kind of let them, kind of decide when they were going to stop. Although, I mean, I guess I would, at a certain point, I was like, I wonder if they're ever gonna stop, because it just seems like
Yeah.
getting close, and that it was so pleasant for them that they just always, seem
Right.
to look forward to it. But
I'm
yeah.
totally in that boat right now. Yeah. All right. So then, what is the difference in age between the first and the second child?
Okay, let's see. That would be I think 5 years, if I'm calculating correctly, because
Mhm.
4 and 9, so 5
Mhm.
years.
Mhm. And so when you were pregnant with your second, was there anything you were thinking about when it came to feeding that you were hoping would go differently? I mean, I know you were hoping you would not give birth early, I'm sure. um, and
Yeah,
that severely impacted your nursing journey. Was there anything else
yeah.
that you were thinking you might want to do differently as you were preparing?
The second time around, one of the things I did that I didn't do the first time around was I went and got like one large container of formula ahead of time, and I put it on my counter, because it was more just the forethought of like, well, with my first, when it didn't come in for a few days, the milk didn't come in for a few days, and then when it did come
Mhm.
in, it came in so intensely that like the breast tissue is like intensely engorged to like be very painful, like very painful, so that the
Yeah.
tissue is like very hard and red. And I
Mhm.
remember just packing like the nursing bra with ice, and I wouldn't typically want ice directly on my
Yeah.
skin, but it was so intense. I remember just packing it with ice to try to deal with that
Mm.
feeling. It was painful, honestly,
Yeah.
the day it came in. And in that instance too, it's like the baby can't even latch because they're engorged, and then they finally, like, that kind of gets past that point, and everything's good again. But because of that kind of 2-day waiting, it always made me feel like a little, during that time period, like even when I would nurse, that there was like nothing there. So I just, for a peace of mind, thought, well, I'll just go out and get everything and have it right there on my counter, so I don't have that kind of stress of thinking that I'm not providing, food. So I got that, and because I was, I think, a little bit more like stringent about it the first time, and just like a little assuming like that it would just be straightforward. And now that I'd already had that experience, I didn't like that kind of peculiar feeling that there wasn't milk coming through, because it's like having a safety net. And I think that other than that, I mean, I didn't, obviously, I was more careful. I never knew what caused the early, you know, the amniotic fluid leaking. They never discovered. And if I needed a break, instead of being so adamant that I would only breastfeed directly from the source, why not ask my husband for help? Because he would have been fine to help. But I had
Right.
some expectations the first time, uh, that weren't,
Yeah.
that didn't play out that way. That I didn't, that I was
Right.
too tired, and probably even at that point of being too tired,
Right.
couldn't even make those other decisions of like, I should probably get a bottle and put breast milk in it and give myself a break because I have a freezer full of breast milk. But just kind of just having my heels dug
Right.
in. I'm not sure, like I said, probably being too tired to even think things through. And so that while I was in my good state of mind, being like, well, I'm gonna put some things in place, and then I was the midwife, um, and I ended up
Mhm.
using one of the tubs to birth in. So I ended up giving birth in one of the tubs,
Mm.
um, and
Oh, I
it
don't
was
remember that. In water? You had a water birth?
it was a water birth, yeah, yeah, because
Oh,
the
I don't remember that. Okay.
yeah, and the thing with that was I found the second birth to be extremely intense and to be painful, and
Mm.
to be
Mhm.
very it felt like a very insurmountable task and an inescapable sensation, that, it actually went really
Mhm.
quick. I was at home and my water broke, and I drove there, and so it
Mhm.
was, like, almost no time elapsed to when I was ready to give birth. It took no time at all, uh,
Yeah.
but extremely
Yeah.
intense, no breaks, and, in that
Yeah.
instance, being like, "What kind of options do I have here?" And they said, "Why didn't you get in the tub? It's often relaxing." And, it only helps so much. And,
Right.
and it was a very short, very intense labor, and, I guess
Mhm.
other than that, uneventful, but yeah, a water birth, and other than that, everything, healthy, no interventions really needed. And so it was a little bit of time at the birthing center, and then you just get to go home. They reached in,
Mhm.
and then handed, the baby to
Mhm.
me, and you're, like, being so physically tired too, I don't know that I could have, like, moved a lot at that
Right.
point,
Yeah. That's
and then
good.
you get to just take your baby right to the bed, and you have them the whole time. Yeah, so
Mhm.
other than my husband also
Mhm.
holding
Yeah.
the baby and putting, the baby on his skin, I got to breastfeed right away, do skin to skin right away, and probably there
Mhm.
I mean, for a few
Mhm.
hours, I think while they just fill out paperwork and
Notice a difference in your milk supply, the second time around? What was that like?
I think, boy, I almost think like it was yeah, there was not any waiting. I think the milk was like ready right away. Like yeah, I could tell it was there. I think if I did a little bit of compression on the breast, I could even see it. I'm trying to remember if I saw it even before giving birth. It's possible it was even there, a little bit before giving
Mhm.
birth. Uh But
Mhm.
yeah, it was much more obvious. And it was like with my first, I mean, he did have a good latch, and but like like more tired. So while like you can have like a very voracious baby that's just like ready to eat and sleep. The other ones are just more sleepy. They'll fall asleep as they try to nurse. So they only get like a couple sucks, and then they're like
Yeah.
sleeping, and you have to kind of they'll do things like have you undress them so that they're a little chilly so that it keeps them awake so that they can do some work versus
Right.
the second baby was just more alert. So um it
Mhm.
felt different. The milk didn't come in the same way. It didn't come in that way that the tissue engorges and is painful. um it was like
Mhm.
less eventful, but more like readily available, like it was ready for the baby, and then it the supply grew with the baby's demand, like the two were more linked, I would say.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, and so how did you know, I know you talked about with your first feeling like you were keeping track of all these things to know that baby was ingesting milk. How did you know at the second that baby was transferring milk? What were you looking for the second time around?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, with the first one, it was way more confusing, but I do remember with the second, it's kind of the same thing that you can just tell that they're drinking. So it was
Mhm.
easy to tell when the letdown happened, and then so I knew the milk was flowing. I could kind of feel it, and then I would see the motions on the baby, but it was much more just intuitive in this instance of that everything kind of was ready and the baby was ready, and then things, moved together. So I didn't pump to build up a supply. I wasn't as concerned. And it was more like, I could just let the baby demand, and choose when to nurse. Like I never at night
Mhm.
went to wake up and said, "Hey, you gotta nurse." It just kind of naturally happened. It seemed like it was just a little more textbook that, oh yeah, like baby's hungry every 2 to 3 hours.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and how long, did it feel normal that time around?
So I
How
think,
long before it really felt normal? Yeah.
yeah, so initially when I couldn't get comfortable, like I couldn't sit right. I was like slouching, like I couldn't get
Mm.
the
Mhm.
nursing pillow right. And then I felt like, again, like maybe like there was a little bit too much compression. And they always show these pictures of babies that with these little kind of like their mouth is open in a particular way where they have like kind of like their lips are pushed out. Um and it didn't look like
Mhm.
it, and it was a little uncomfortable. And then I got a little cracking and bleeding, and I was like, this is all wrong. And I just thought, okay, I'll go to somebody. It doesn't hurt, might as well. I didn't with my first I didn't have a lot of luck where I would, go to individuals, and really it was almost just like waiting it out. And eh, people, I mean, they gave me information, but nobody like solved the problem. It was almost just kind of waiting it out. um but this time around, I think I went within like, maybe the first 2 or 3 weeks, and went to see
Mhm.
somebody, and they assessed, and the first thing they pointed out was that the way I was sitting was uncomfortable. And, was like slouching
Mm.
over. And they said, if you're not comfortable, it's not going to work out to begin with. But the baby is so tiny, and you're trying to prop him on this little pillow and trying to get him close to that. But they showed me like better techniques and how to relax and get into a comfortable position while they were still small. And then she had kind of said, give it a little bit and just kind of like not hassle the baby and let the baby kind of feel it out, because babies are pretty intuitive in getting this down. If you kind of just set them up in a good
Mhm.
position and you're comfortable and you're not, stressed out, and you're not, you know and just see, like, just give it a couple days. And and sure enough, it did, it ended up just becoming completely comfortable, and I had like no issues. And then going forward, I never
Oh.
had them. And so it was kind of like the baby was kind of learning, like, okay, like what's this letdown like, and how's this latch, and it just kind of did come together, where giving them a little bit of time and not trying to position their head or position their chin a certain way was, and a little bit of strength gained in the baby itself. They kind of it just kind of we worked together and figured out like the optimal positioning, and they kind of figured out the optimal latch. Like it did kind of just come natural. And again, with a little bit of growth too, a little bit of time and growth to set things up. And I thought it was interesting that
Yeah.
she had mentioned anatomy, that maybe things didn't always look like how they draw it in a book, because anatomy is different. Like a nipple could be longer or it could be shorter, and breasts are different shape. And so, it can work out differently, and sometimes interfering and trying to force a latch this way or that way, or get it to look a certain way, might be more interruptive than the baby even just getting a little bit of time to kind of check things out, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, wow, that worked out for you.
Mm.
Yeah, and how long did you end up, nursing your 2nd?
So my second is they just turned 4, and I'm still nursing.
Yeah, me too. I'm on the 4-year-old nursing train as well.
So and
Kinda ready to be done myself, but yeah.
I I mean, I don't, I guess for me it's pleasant and I like it, but it's just kind of that thing of, they still look so small to me. And it's funny because they probably
Yeah.
don't, but I don't intend to have any more children. So I think it's a little bit of that. And for some reason, I don't know why,
Mhm.
I thought too, I think when my supply started to deplete at the same time they started to wean. So they kind of went together and it just naturally stopped. And so far, like my supply hasn't really diminished at all. And I thought a few times that it was done, even, around two or so, I thought it was done. And then something would happen, like, they would just come over for comfort. Like they would, fall and come over for comfort to hug. And then they would want to feel my skin and then they would start nursing. Or some of the times, when they
Yeah.
when they would be under the weather, they got the flu at one point, and they were super super sick and didn't want to eat anything for like 2 weeks. And nursing got us through that area. Um, so just a few things like that happened and kind
Yeah.
of kept it going. And if the milk had depleted, I think it would have naturally stopped, but for some reason it hadn't, and so it's just kind of continued. And it's not like a notable thing to me. Like I almost
Yeah.
don't think about it. Like it's almost second nature, and it doesn't happen a ton.
Is nursing your 4-year-old still a daily event? Does it happen every day, or
Yeah, I would say it's every
is it not
day.
every day?
Yeah, I'd say it's every day. Never for
Every
like
day.
very
Okay.
long, I'd say. And again, a lot of times,
Mhm.
sometimes it's just comfort or just wanting to kind of be close to mom,
Mhm.
and that's kind of part of
Yeah.
being close to
Yeah.
mom. And I just it's funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll get busy, so it's something where like it wasn't even a thought, and I think that's even part of the ease of it is that being so busy, I didn't have time to worry or fixate on like, is this enough or what, how old is this child or anything. It would literally be sometimes doing something or talking to somebody, and all of a sudden they're coming over for a little cuddle or something, and it's just kind of naturally happening. And
Mhm.
I just really never stopped to like
Yeah.
really think about it too much. Again, I think eh, the second one, everything's easier with the second for me because there's more things going on. So I never even really like thought on
Right,
it, but then
exactly.
then it would spring to mind sometimes, and I'd be like, oh, I didn't really intend or set out for this to happen. And even sometimes thinking, should I do anything about this? Like, not that I had like there's like any kind of like big reason behind it, but just like, oh, like, do I want to, like, do I want to start like kind of weaning, or does it matter? But then I get too busy to think much more about it.
Yeah. 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 And I am thankful during, COVID that I'm providing immunity for my child who still can't be vaccinated. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a bonus.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So as we wrap up here, I would love to know what was the worst advice you were given about breastfeeding?
The worst advice. Oh, let me think.
Or the worst experience. Yeah. People have told me worst experiences too.
I mean, I've heard people like be flippant about like, what do you mean it's hard? Like you just stick them on, like relating to comfort and
Mm,
breastfeeding. And
mm,
I just thought, well, it was just kind of
mhm.
unsupportive and dismissive. And there's
Yeah,
lots of different scenarios, and it's like it's
it's
just
a
kind
real
of
thing.
hurtful during a sensitive time when there's a lot going on for a comment like that. And I think other than that,
Right,
like,
exactly.
I wish there had been like someone had intervened maybe and maybe given, for my preemie, pushed for them to have donor milk while I was waiting for my milk to come in or something. Because
Mhm,
an afterthought
mhm,
was I felt kind of stressed out about them having to wait for milk to come in. Um, and nobody seemed concerned about
mhm,
it, but it's just something that's always stuck with me and felt kind of stressful. So I feel like that
mhm,
was, one of those. And also they were very aggressive about how the latch was with the preemie as well. And that, like, like grabbing their head
mm,
and doing this kind of weird move with their head where you kind of like tipped it and dragged it down the breast to get them to into a bigger, deeper latch. And I think that the information was incorrect because I think the latch depth really depends again on the woman's anatomy, on how the nipple's anatomy is, and that's what a later lactation consultant had told me, and I think they were spot
mm,
on, and I think that the first one
mhm.
was mistaken on that the latch shouldn't have been as deep with the baby being as small as it was, and because the nipple was a longer length, that it should look different, and that they're not always going to look the same. And so I think that was
Mm,
problematic as well, to kind of force that and to not think outside the box or think in other ways, and that could have, that could have caused some missteps.
okay. Yeah. 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 For sure. All right. And then you kind of already told us some good advice you got, so maybe this is it. But the best advice you got?
I think the best advice I got was, as long as, as long as intense damage isn't happening, if, that anything can be possible, again, within a comfort zone. Um, because I thought things were kind of black and white, and that, like there just should be no cracking and there should be no bleeding. And that kind of advice was like, well, you're just trying to figure this out. The baby's just trying to figure it out. And sometimes in the beginning, it takes a little bit to adjust to something. And that babies can be very intuitive about working something out, because they want the success
Mm,
kind of as much as you do, because because it's comforting to them, and it's nice, and they need nourishment. And so giving it a little bit of time, and maybe even taking that time to not be so instrumental in setting up how things are supposed to look or happen, and maybe even letting the baby try to figure things out might be one of those things to try that might work. um, I think sometimes some of those interventions
yeah.
in the beginning interrupt that, where you see some videos where babies do a breast crawl and they're able to find the breast immediately, and kind of work that latch. And they do the best when they have less interventions, which of course we can't always do. Sometimes there needs to be interventions in there for safety. Um, but I think that was the best advice. And I didn't get the advice from anybody, but I think, I never ended up using that formula or the bottles that I got and put on my counter. But it took a lot of
Hmm.
stress, and a lot of weight off my shoulders, just knowing I had another option, and it was fine. That saying, "Hey, I'm super tired. I need a break. Let me use these things." Or, "Hey, I feel like maybe I'm not giving, I'm not getting enough nourishment, and this would just help me de-stress," was a nice thing to have kind of in the wings, because I think that, mental health is paramount. Um, and so anything you can do to kind of
Yeah.
assist you is the
Yeah.
most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories
Oh, well,
with
thank
us.
you.
I really enjoyed hearing them.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to the Milk Making Minutes. I hope you found connection and feel supported wherever you are in your baby feeding journey. The views expressed in each interview are deeply personal and sacred, and I'm so grateful to each person who was generous enough to share their story. It is also true that those views are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect my opinion or advice as a lactation supporter, and this podcast does not qualify as medical advice. If you are struggling to feed your baby, please seek out the support of a local IBCLC.